We're going to move into our lunch plenary, and I'm going to ask our colleague Elaine Clegg to come up and speak. I just want to say I've known Elaine for a couple of years now. One time I flew into Boise and she gave me a tour of all the train stations in the 60-mile Treasure Valley, and it was and is remarkable. The history of freight and passenger rail in Idaho is spectacular. And I mentioned earlier, you know, Sun Valley was built up because of the Averill Harriman and the railroads. And what she has been able to do, formerly on the Boise City Council and now Director of the Valley Regional Transit. And she is one of our partners, along with Big Sky and Cascades Corridor in our accelerator. But what's interesting about Elaine is her ability to reach out to the railroad, to Union Pacific. They're trying to acquire some of their line into Boise. The way that she works with the congressional delegation and the governors and Republicans and Democrats in the Idaho legislature, and Idaho's a very red state. How she promotes regional transit, how she gets colleges and developers and major companies to think about transit, bus and rail in this fast-growing area in Treasure Valley, to think about how it can bring jobs and connectivity is remarkable. And the best news is, if everything goes according to plan, she will be on the Amtrak Board of Directors. It's not confirmed, but she, and I talked to Senator Cantwell, whose committee she was before, who's a good friend at one of Cantwell's events, and she said, I know Elaine, before I even walked, I know Elaine Clegg, I know, she's great, okay, we're gonna have our hearing on Tuesday. And she came through the hearing, we watched it with flying colors. So if there's justice in the world, she will be our Amtrak board representative and bring all these great ideas to Washington, D.C., because we all know sometimes Amtrak gets absorbed on issues east of the Mississippi. So we're gonna redirect their attention. Elaine.
That's okay. We'll let Tom do his magic here. Okay. Well, thank you, Bruce. That was awfully kind. So I'm Elaine Clegg. I currently am the CEO of Valley Regional Transit in the Boise Metro region. I was a 20-year city council member on the Boise City Council, and also worked for a nonprofit that did a lot of work around transportation and land use planning. So I've been around this world for a long time. I've been part of a couple of other national efforts. I was a board member and president of the board of the Association of MPOs. I was vice chair and then chair of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee at National League of Cities. And so I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to bring all of that experience and knowledge to this new endeavor, this new challenge that we're all facing of how do we restore passenger rail in the United States in a way that's meaningful, in a way that reaches all of the residents of the United States and not just those in certain places, and in a way that we can move into this new era with, I think, you know, I have 5 children and 14 grandchildren, and all of them are much more attuned to transit and rail than my generation is. So how can we take advantage of that and make sure that they have the opportunities to ride the kind of transit and the kind of rail that they expect, frankly, because they've seen what other places in the world have done, and they expect our country to be able to do the same. So what we're hoping to do with this lunch plenary is have a little higher level conversation. Dave, thank you for referencing the big dreams and the big challenges that we talked about as a country in the 60s that put a person on the moon in 8 years and 4 months. And you know, it stuns me sometimes that we talk about existing rail corridors and trying to reestablish service that used to be there. So it's in brand new service, and the idea that it might take 25 or 30 years. But it might. And so part of what we'll talk about today is why it could and what are the things that we could do to move that timeline forward more quickly. What are the key issues that we need to think about and the hurdles that we need to overcome to make that happen? So, like I said, this is going to be more of a conversation. We'll hear from each panelist, and then I'll pose a few questions, and then all of you, please be prepared for some questions yourself, because we really do want this part of the agenda to be more of a conversation than a presentation. So with that, I'm going to sit down and go to our first panelist, which is John Robert Smith. Two of our panelists you've already heard from. You know that the complete bios are in your program, so if you need those, please go to them. John Robert probably doesn't need much introduction to many of you. He was the former mayor of Meridian, Mississippi, Amtrak board member and chair, now chair of Transportation for America, and just all around advocate for all things rail. So we'll move to John Robert.
Thank you, Elaine, and good to be with all of you again. I was on an earlier panel and spoke about the development around Union Station in Meridian, Mississippi, and what that had meant to our local economy and what the Gulf service means to the economies across the Mississippi Gulf between New Orleans and Mobile. But in this panel, I want to try to raise our vision a little higher to the national level. And I want to start by acknowledging the work of my two fellow panelists. The Surface Transportation Board in many ways precipitated the beginning of the Gulf service between New Orleans and Mobile, because we had been at loggerheads for well over a decade. And it was the interest, engagement, and involvement in an appropriate way of the Surface Transportation Board that brought the freights in the port of Mobile and Amtrak into a settlement agreement. And STB was unrelenting in moving towards that settlement agreement. And I think Marty Oberman, the chair, really crystallized the important issue. He spoke at a meeting of the STB and said, the aggrieved party here is neither freight nor the port, nor even Amtrak. The aggrieved party are the people of the Gulf who have gone without passenger rail service for now 17 years. And I think that approach made a big difference on achieving the settlement, and now we look to start service hopefully in the first quarter of 2025. I also want to recognize Nicole, who I have found is a breath of fresh air to Amtrak's discussion of a national system. I truly believe that Nicole is committed to expanding a national system. She will tell you the truth. She will be honest with you, even if the news may not be good. But the only way we can achieve success is we're honest, straightforward, and transparent with each other. And Elaine, I'm so thrilled that you're joining the Amtrak board. You bring that experience of local government service, which is the only level of government in this country that has to work, and has to work every day. You bring that kind of problem solving and ability to bring disparate interests together. And I know of your commitment to the national system, and so good to have you there. So as we look ahead to the election, November the 5th, and however many weeks it will take for us to know the outcome, one thing we do know now is there's going to be a new administration in Washington, D.C. It doesn't matter which candidate wins. It's going to be a different administration. You'll see secretaries and administrators leave and go to the private sector. This happens in any change of government. This will happen in shortly after the new government is in place. So there will be different visions at the top of each of the agencies or secretariat positions over time, probably. And when you look to Congress, we already know that some congressmen are not coming back. So that's going to change the makeup of congressional committees. And it's certainly reasonable to think that there will be changes in ranking member and committee chairs. So while some of you may look at that outcome with dread, I want to let's refocus as to how any change can create a great opportunity. And I think this coming change can create a great opportunity, but only if we at the local, state, and regional level stay focused. And the focus can't be parochial, just on your service or your train. The focus really has to be nationally, because we're going to be dealing in the next Congress and the next administration in overarching national interest on passenger rail. Think about it. From the day Amtrak was formed, we now have a smaller national system. Over the years, with almost no funding, the struggle has been merely to keep alive as much of the system as we can. And I want to think there were moments when we not only kept it alive, but we were able to grow it some, but I believe I heard Nicole mention fix it first, and we did that. We offered exceptional onboard service and had a fine product to sell to the American public. So if we're genuinely serious about expanding passenger rail across this country, um, linking not only parts of my native South, but where you all are located today and the regions you serve that I've had the opportunity to visit many times, then it's going to take a fundamental rethinking of how we provide passenger rail, because over the decades since Amtrak was formed, we have not been able to capture that vision of expanding passenger rail. And there are lots of issues I think this panel will discuss as to why. You know, where there are offices already reaching out to us at Transportation for America um, in an attempt to position bills moving forward in the next Congress. Some may even be introduced this year just to have them out for discussion, but the real work will be done in starting in January. But they've already begun to seek language and suggestions to strengthen the passenger rail program. And it can't be just throwing more money at it. So some things, for example, strengthening the FRA's ability to get clear, straightforward answers on that which exists in the built environment from the freight railroads and from Amtrak as well. They have not had that ability. It's been a tough process to get some information. I was pleased with FRA when the hearing for STB, before STB was scheduled, FRA made a very strong case for what needed, the kind of information that needed to be shared so that decisions could be made about infrastructure investments along the coast. And these would be non-proprietary information that should be shared. That's just one thing. Another is perhaps there's a way to strengthen and streamline the STB so that it can even more effectively and be more flexible in addressing these loggerheads that have occurred in the past between freight operations and the host and passenger rail providers. And again, those people who are the ones to be served by that connectivity. I think there are those opportunities that exist. There have been changes in some of the freight leadership, specifically in dealing with CSX in a personal way, with a new outlook on working with passenger rail. After all, the federal law is that Amtrak has right of access to all freight right-of-way and properties to use, must pay for that use, and that passengers take priority. So um, there will be language to be considered that can make that more of the reality rather than the exception to the rule. And I look forward to the discussion with my two fellow panelists. Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you. Thank you, John Robert. Really appreciated. Good perspective. Next, we're going to hear from Neil Moyer. Neil joined the board of the Surface Transportation Board staff in 2014. Had a really pioneering career at the Federal Railroad Administration, including chief of the Intercity Passenger Rail Analysis Division and chief financial and economic analysis. So excited to hear from Neil about his perspective on where we're headed nationally.
Tom, did you give me? What do I press?
Welcome, Neil.
Thank you, Elaine. Hi, my name is Neil Moyer. I'm Director of the Office of Passenger Rail at the Surface Transportation Board. Sorry, now it works. Okay, thank you. It's my pleasure to be at this conference, and I want to thank those who have gone before me for their very interesting and inspiring information and points that they've made. My purpose here is to give you an overview of what the agency does, and in particular, its involvement in intercity passenger rail. Is my... Oh, there we go. Thank you. Now that I've got that figured out. The Surface Transportation Board is a regulatory agency, regulatory and adjudicatory, that focuses on the economic regulation of the nation's private railroads, whose primary line of business, as you know, and has been discussed already, is freight transportation. For example, we were responsible for approving mergers, such as that of the Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern, which happened in April of last year. We also adjudicate rate disputes between railroads and shippers. However, the most common regulatory work the agency does is related to licensing. For example, authorizing construction and abandonment of rail lines, operations and control of a railroad, and trail use. So, given everything that I've said about our freight dockets, you might be asking yourself, why does our agency have an Office of Passenger Rail? Well, we do have a limited set of responsibilities related to passenger rails. And even though they are limited, they are an integral part of the plan, the congressional plan that exists for passenger rail, which is expressed, first of all, in the Interstate Commerce Act as amended, which goes back to 1887, and more recently to the 1970 Rail Passenger Service Act, which created Amtrak after a very quick decline with long-term routes in the passenger service that we're all painfully aware of. And finally, the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act of 2008. And then, of course, there's much more to the big picture, as we've already discussed, the Infrastructure Act. If Amtrak and a host railroad cannot agree on the terms for their access to the host railroad. The STB can order the access and set the terms and conditions of that access. We can also provide dispute resolution between Amtrak and those states that sponsor intercity passenger rail service when it comes to cost allocation under PRIA Section 209, which those of you involved in state government would be very much aware of. In addition, the board can arrange for mediation between the Northeast Corridor Commission, Amtrak, and those commuter agencies on the Northeast Corridor that are dependent on Amtrak as their host. And that is of special interest at the other side of the country, but it still constitutes responsibilities. Importantly, our licensing authority can apply not just to freight, but also to passenger rail service when and if a non-Amtrak operator wants to construct or operate a rail passenger service in the country. Otherwise, we do not have economic regulation over Amtrak. One of the board's newest passenger rail functions and the basic focus of the Office of Passenger Rail is on-time performance. If an Amtrak train fails to achieve the required on-time standard, which is 80% of passengers being on time in any 2 consecutive quarters, if an Amtrak service can't meet that, the board can launch an investigation into the causes of that poor on-time performance. And if we should find in the course of that investigation that the poor on-time performance is attributable to a railroad's failure to honor the preference that's required to be given to passenger over freight transportation, then under certain circumstances, the board can award damages. So that is the a very recent and important addition to our responsibilities. So hopefully this gives you an idea of the scope of what we do at the STB. And I want to thank you for your attention and obviously for your obvious interest in intercity passenger rail. And I'll look forward to the balance of our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil, and really appreciate learning more about STB. Now up is Nicole Busich, and Nicole is the Vice President of Network Development at Amtrak, where she's responsible for guiding the network expansion initiatives across the U.S., obviously something of great importance to us. I just learned recently that she also led the development of the Connect NEC program for the NEC Commission, which is a 15-year strategic plan for how to improve the infrastructure to make the Northeast Corridor work the way that we all expect it to. And I think that experience is really exciting experience for network expansion at Amtrak as we try to figure out how to develop the plan so that we can expand these networks. Welcome, Nicole.
Oh, thank you. We can keep that one up, it's fine. Hello again. So I just have to start by saying I work for Amtrak and I'm here west of the Mississippi. It had to be said. I actually spend a lot of time on the western part of the country. We can't play favorites in corridor ID. There's 69 corridors. It's like having 69 children. You can't pick your favorite, but But I will tell you, if you just look at all the places I've traveled across the country and how much time I've spent here, I think that that's a true reflection of how committed Amtrak is to the growth here. And it really is sort of where we think the greatest growth potential is. So I'll leave it at that. You heard from me at in the previous session. I don't have slides for you again, but I wanted to make sure that I hit on a couple of things that I didn't speak about this morning, and it kind of ties to some of the comments that were made throughout the panel, the previous panel. So I want to go back a little bit in time. So in the spring of 2021, keep in mind this was before the infrastructure bill, it was before Corridor ID was established. Amtrak issued our Connects Us plan. Some people called it Connects US, Connects Us, tomato, tomato, all the same thing, right? And what that was Amtrak's vision to describe what the benefits of an expanded rail network would be if funding was available, right? So that, and this preceded my time at Amtrak, but really a valuable document that set the stage for what was to come, which was the infrastructure funding and the Corridor ID and the long distance study, for that matter. So the thing to keep in mind, and I think Santi mentioned this earlier, is that the program Corridor ID is operator agnostic. And what does that mean, right? I'm sure maybe you were thinking, what does that mean for you all? What does that mean for Amtrak? And what that means is that, yes, back in Connects Us, we were in the driver's seat. We painted this vision about how exciting all the expansion can be. Now, we are in a supporting role. I'd like to say sometimes we're in the passenger seat, sometimes we're in the back seat. But for the majority of the expansion initiatives across the country, we are partnering, we are not leading, with the exception of those 4 that I mentioned earlier, where we're leading those initiatives. So it's important when I speak to, I spend a lot of time traveling across the country, a lot of time in the western part of the country, just say that again. But a lot of what I like to do is to communicate what the benefits are of partnering with Amtrak. And explaining how we can help Corridor ID sponsors and help with the FRA long distance study, how we can help every step of the process to get it from where we are now to the trains running. So first, benefit of partnering with Amtrak is access to our existing rail system and our existing facilities and connections to our existing routes. There's a lot that Kirk mentioned earlier about the internal processes that had to be set up to allow our ticketing system to accept the free fares for the youth program. There is so much that goes on behind the scenes at Amtrak that from marketing and communications and technology and all of that. So appreciate that these things, you can't just snap a finger, but partnering with Amtrak, you have the benefit of having all of those resources that we already have in place for our existing services. Also, the statutory access to the National Rail Network that was mentioned a few times. So our Aero train sets that Kirk showed the beautiful picture and explained that the first order, the first order will be coming to the Pacific Northwest, and that's very exciting in 2026. Partnering with Amtrak allows access to an option order that we have with Siemens. So we have the existing order that is placed, and those train sets will be coming, but we also have the ability to build on those. And what does that mean exactly? That means that there's a lot that goes into getting those trains to the production line. And so it's saving all of that research and development and design, right? And we can piggyback off of that and look to use those options for the network expansion that we've been talking about. We also have the ability to run demonstration trains. And these are opportunities to build future support, get local stakeholders on board, and we have a lot of fun doing that. In my tenure, we've done a few. We did one between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and then more recently, we did a demonstration train between Denver and Longmont, part of the why am I losing my mind? The Front Range Passenger Rail line, yes. So thank you for the assist. So that is something that we've done in the past and we will continue to do. And partnering with Amtrak and Corridor ID means that we can provide technical assistance. And the question was raised at the end of the last panel, but we are working very hard to try to figure out ways to save time, right? If you think about the Corridor ID program and all the steps and all of the parts of the service development plan, there's a lot of commonalities, especially, across the board. So, really looking to create the opportunity to share that information with our partners to help them move through the process quicker. So I want to talk a little bit about funding, and I'm sure we're going to open this up when we get to questions. But the IIJA, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, it did provide historic levels of funding for intercity passenger rail. The majority of that funding, the $66 billion, was focused on discretionary grant funding. $22 billion that was directed towards Amtrak is sort of going back to the fix it first. The majority of that is being used to procure equipment to replace our aging equipment across our system. And that includes the Aero train sets as well as long distance train sets. So the Aeros, they're starting to be delivered in 2026. And then we recently issued an RFP for the new bi-level long distance train sets. It's important to note that a priority in that recent procurement is ADA accessibility, to make sure if we have bi-level train sets that folks with disability can access all parts of the train. So that's in process. Both of these procurements, for the Aero train sets for state supported and for the NEC, and then for the long distance, funded by the infrastructure bill, is for existing service. None of that is for future expansion. So that's important for us to all sort of remember that. So the transformational opportunities provided by this funding for rail expansion is a kickstart to our process. And Santi mentioned in the last session about the money that's available for Corridor ID. That's not enough to fund all of the steps to get all the 69 corridors to operation. So we all need to work together, and there's many things that we can do to ensure that reauthorization and the efforts that we all collectively can do can answer these questions and help us get to more ribbon cutting. So welcome your questions, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Nicole. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, but I'm on a mic.
Yes or no? No? Okay, I'll go back to this one. We'll just pass it along. So thank you. I think all three of our panelists did a good job in introducing the challenges that are before us. Probably the biggest question on my mind, and I think on many of the people's minds in the room here, is why in the world does it take so long to add new service or to increase frequencies? What are the holdups?
That's me. So this is probably, can everybody hear me? There's not one answer. So I'm gonna start by not answering the question, but answering the question. So maybe it was 2 years ago, it was early in my tenure in Amtrak. I attended I think maybe some folks in the room were there. There was an event in Sun Valley, Idaho. And I was one of the speakers, I think it was during the dinner session. And one of the questions was, how long do you think it will take to bring service to the state of Idaho? And I mistakenly answered the question. And, I was new. I will never answer that question again, because John Robert Smith mentioned about my honesty, and it's in me to just give you as much information as I can and not paint a rosy picture. It does take a long time. Even this past May, 10 years in the making for one additional train set one additional round trip on a line where we already operate service, right? So there's a whole host of issues that go into to actually answer your question.
Yeah.
And I would say this is not necessarily in order of challenge, but one is funding, right? Before this moment in time, we haven't had the opportunity to expand and add, so we haven't even tested the timelines because we weren't in the mode that we are right now, right? Yeah. So one is funding. We kind of have a path forward. It's not enough, right? That's one. Two is host railroad agreements, right? And getting the host railroads involved. And Neil mentioned about sort of, where we are and when there's challenges, but frankly, we shouldn't ever have to get to that point. I think FRA's Corridor ID program and the efforts, FRA, by the way, has been doing a tremendous job in advancing this program. It seems like things are moving slowly, but if any of you have ever been involved in a grant process, they announced the awards in December of last year, and 69 corridors are all obligated and all already working on their step one activities. So, that in and of itself is unprecedented. But one of the other things that FRA has done as part of this process is they have created a group that is focused on host railroad relationships. They meet quarterly with every single one of the Class 1 host railroads and discuss the corridors and the efforts that are ongoing. So I think that's the part that we were missing in the past, and part of the reason why things took so long was not bringing in the host railroads sooner. Right, that's one of the things that we've heard in many meetings that I've had where we've been lucky enough to have states and host railroads around the table. The thing that's been challenging is that, folks put out reports and planning studies, and the host railroads find out about it when it's advertised in the public, right? We can't do that anymore, right? We need to have early engagement with the host railroads and understand the challenges and what we need to do no harm. We all understand, yes, I work for Amtrak, but we understand the benefit of and the foundation of what freight service means in this country, right? So we have to figure out a way to do both. And then I would say lastly, that one of the challenges that we have in terms of the time is the sort of multi-state engagement and the agreements. There are dozens of agreements that need to be signed, sealed, and delivered in order to start a new service. And those are not easy. So again, I think FRA's program, Corridor ID program, a lot of the challenges that we've had of late will be addressed in the service development plan. A lot of those key questions about, are the states sort of set up and ready to fund and to support, and do they have rail divisions to move forward on these programs? Those questions are going to be asked and answered in the service development plans. So we're not spending 10 years trying to figure this out, but we're going to answer those questions sooner. rather than later. So that was a really long answer, I'm sorry, but
That's okay.
it's opened up a can of worms.
See if Neil has anything, and John Robert?
I'd like to add to what Nicole, can you hear me now?
There we go.
Okay. Building a little bit on what Nicole has mentioned, I think I'm looking back to my prior role at the FRA, to try to give you an example of the reason why you should never be discouraged by things like no funding. Because you can't know, there's no trust fund, there's no trust fund. So the funding has historically been dependent on hills and valleys in whatever the federal government decided to provide. But those states that anticipated and kept working at it were able to build on it fairly quickly once funding became available. So I think this really should encourage everyone, no matter what the situation may be. Right now, of course, it's better than it has been historically in the past, but you never know with this. Under the current way that passenger rail is funded. The best example that I can think of is on the other side of the country in North Carolina. There was no money really of any substantial amount, but they worked on grade crossings. Well, grade crossings, they sealed their corridor. They put improvements at every grade crossing that would really help the safety aspect and facilitate passenger rail service. And grade crossing money is always available because it comes through FHW. A lot of it comes through FHWA. And FHWA has a trust fund. I don't want to go into that. But, okay, so then there was a line that had been, for some reason or another, allowed to be abandoned. The main line between Richmond and Raleigh, North Carolina. And I was writing reports on this line back in the 2000-2005 period. Well, at least something was happening. And they kept working at it, and eventually when funds became available, they were actually able to get money to buy it, and then of course it's taken time to develop it still further. But this unfortunately has taken through now probably 25 years, I think, basically. But I just wanted to offer that as an additional example of where a state has done what it could when it could, and when the time came, it was ready. And of course, now we have programs in place that are going to enable more things to get ready. You have these 69 projects going. So that's really the message that I would like to give, and I hope. And there have been other examples mentioned thus far in this program, which really should get some encouragement.
So, Elaine,
Thank you. We'll take a question here from Gary.
Is this thing on?
Yes.
This is a question for Nicole. You mentioned demonstration trains. My name is Gary Wirt. I'm Vice President of All Aboard Washington. It's a 501c3 organization that's been promoting passenger rail in the Pacific Northwest for more than 40 years. Would it be possible, or could we work with you through Big Sky to arrange a demonstration train for the preferred route of the North Coast Hiawatha?
So can you hear me? Oh, that's better. I have your card. We'll be in touch. So I will say, I will say, again, in all honesty, there's limited funding for this. We have to be selective. My guess is if we could do it, it's not going to be for the entire corridor. We would, so for example, when we did Front Range, we didn't do from Pueblo all the way to Fort Collins. We sort of picked keep in mind, to do these, we need to have yet another agreement with our host railroads to allow us to run these demonstration trains. I know it's a one-off, but it's still a process. So, you know, we do have budget in our FY '25 to run one or two, so certainly we will, you know, put your hat in the ring.
I just think it would be a great way to develop stakeholder support along the route, and particularly in those cities that don't have any service now.
Yep.
So Elaine,
It looks like the audience is pretty excited to ask questions, so why don't we go to those?
John Robert Smoot has his.
Oh, John Robert, did you want to pipe in on that one?
yeah, actually both of the last questions. So first of all, on the inspection train, the ride along, that's how we got the Gulf service started. Senator Wicker wanted to see a train run from New Orleans to Mobile. And with that route and with all of the enthusiasm for every city that stopped, and it's a relatively short route, but that's how Amtrak was brought to the table. I mean, they had to run the train, but once they saw the outpouring of support, it became much more realistic for them. It also garnered the support of the senators and congressmen along in those 3 states. So a demonstration train yields many, many benefits. But I wanted to go back to the prior question. And please don't think that the future with the next Congress is necessarily confined by the same laws, statutes, and programs that exist today. When we wanted to start service on the Gulf Coast Working Group was created, again, by Senator Wicker's action. The work of that group was overseen by the FRA, and flowing out of that work created 2 new programs. The Chrissy Grant Program, Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Program, and the Restoration Enhancement Grant, because we had to have a way to pay for the infrastructure needed, and we had to have a way to provide operating support for that train. And this was done in a year when Congress said there will be no new programs. That's why it's called Consolidated Rail. We took a number of programs working with, again, Commerce Committee, pulled them together, and then embellished the heck out of them with opportunities for passenger rail and short line railroads. And Chrissy has been the main way of providing infrastructure support for corridors and for expansions until Fed State came along, and we'll see how that works out in the long run for the national system. But look at what needs to be changed to allow your vision to become a reality. Don't think that you're confined only by existing law. And when you look at the highway system, we would not have an interstate highway system but for formula funds that flow. Doesn't mean we can't have formula funds for rail investment, both passenger and freight that flow to states, DOTs, and commissions. That can help propel a lot of imagination and implementation.
Thank you, John Robert. Appreciate that insight into how we've gotten where we are. Holly, you have a question. You want to introduce yourself?
Hello? Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. My name is Holly Anna Littlebull. I'm formerly with Yakima Nation. I'm no longer with them anymore, but I've been working on railroad and specifically Yakima Nation since 2003, which has expanded now to tribes within the United States, and not only the United States, but First Nation in Canada. As an Amtrak employee, did you know that there were agreements with tribal nations prior to privatization of railroad? And I'll be speaking more about this tomorrow. But that's my question, is because I bet 90% of the people in this room haven't even considered consulting with tribal nations when it comes to railroad on any of their projects.
So I think the question, Holly, was what knowledge is there within Amtrak of the responsibilities of Amtrak to consult with tribal nations as they go forward?
So I will say that, are you talking about for new corridors?
For historical and new.
So I've only been with Amtrak for 2.5 years, so I can't speak to historical. But what I can speak is moving forward, is that every FRA process requires that to be part of the program. Prior to joining Amtrak, every environmental impact statement that I ever worked on, required, especially, when it was sort of prevalent in that particular area, to consult with tribal nations. So I think, at least from my personal experience, it's always been part of the process. I guess I'm not understanding if you think that it's something that we missed. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I'll be speaking about that tomorrow during my presentation.
Okay.
But my second question is, and I have been asking this for years, why is there no tribal representation on the board or on the committee that goes to the White House?
I'm not sure that I can answer that question. I'm sorry, but I can certainly take that to our leadership.
Thank you. We only have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to take the moderator's privilege of asking one question first. If we have time for another one, we'll get there. I think both of all three of the questions we've had so far brought up the issues around funding, around representation, around other things, all of which I think point to what are the actions we need to be taking at both a regional and national level to move the ideas forward that we're talking about. Advocacy involves innovation. John Robert alluded to that. During reauthorization, there's an opportunity, I think, to add new ideas to the reauthorization statute, as well as refine some of the ideas that are there, maybe consolidate some of them, streamline some of them. Do you have any advice, either one of you, about the things we should be thinking about that would make it easier for all of this to move forward while still making sure that we represent the folks in the room?
So I think that part of my previous answer kind of touched on all this, but I think if we sort of boil this down, my answer, if I boil it down to the specific routes that you all care about, what can you do? My advice to you all is move as quickly as you can, because the funding is not, it's not an open checkbook, right? So I understand that there's processes and things that we want to do to make sure we check all the boxes of the service development plan and all those efforts, but it's going to be first in, first out for this program. So if you can work together to move as efficiently as possible, that is my advice. The second is, the money is not unlimited, so we need to all work with our congressional leaders and our state representatives to make sure that they are all informed and that you're using examples of other parts of the country, places like Colorado and Virginia, where they've created funding sources for these types of rail service, where they have robust rail divisions. I think you need to look at examples of successes and then sort of bring that to your local endeavors.
And I guess I'll just repeat the advice I gave before, and that is to keep working at it. And also, the planning process, get the details straight and get it all straight with all the people involved. I know that's an elementary concept, and I know it's built into the programs that are currently in place. but it's complicated and a lot is technical and it all needs to be worked out in advance. So that's basically it.
Yeah, one more comment. Now, I made this comment at one of the early long-distance workshops, is we have to learn from what has happened before us. And if you think about when Amtrak came into existence and the routes, the long-distance routes that had existed that we did not take over, and then those that were eliminated, why were they eliminated, right? What was the reason? And how is the work we're doing now going to future-proof? So we're not repeating the issues of the past. We're going to spend a lot of time and money and energy to get the restoration of these corridors to fruition. But what are we going to do differently to make sure that they're future-proofed? And I don't have the answer, but I think we can. There's a lot of really smart people in this room that we can all work together.
Great advice. John Robert, did you have any comments on that one?
You know I do, Elaine. So the comments of the other two panelists highlight very important technical issues that you need to be dealing with in moving forward with the current funding that's available or the corridors that you're a part of that are identified. But very rapidly, things will change in some fashion. And those of you who are elected officials will probably be making a trip to Washington, D.C. shortly, sometime in early January, probably, to meet with new members of Congress, perhaps new committee chairs. You need to have your story ready. And your story needs to be one about the economic development impact that's going to come to your hometown. It can't be about nostalgia. It can't be talking about, well, we once had the train, but we don't have it now. It's got to be about a forward-looking vision for what passenger rail can mean in jobs, in connectivity, in connection to education, connection to the larger region, those issues, and only you can tell your story. And I'm telling you, your locally driven stories of what change votes on Capitol Hill. I've seen it over and over and over again. Those who will sit on the platform and lash into Amtrak, who's sitting there representing all passenger rail, will turn around when they hear from their locals and vote differently. If you go back and look at every vote that in the House of Representatives that was to cease funding for Amtrak, it fails because there were Republican members of Congress who have service in their district, and they heard from their citizens and their mayors about how important Amtrak was to their future.
Thank you. I think that's a good note to end on. Let's thank the panelists again. Thank you.